September 5th, 2018. Carla, please call the roll.
Saltzman,
Here.
Udaly,
Here.
Fritz.
Here.
Fish,
Here.
Wheeler.
Here. Legal counsel, do you want to give us our
Thank you.
intro statement, please?
What's that?
Thank you.
Okay, yes.
Thank you.
Welcome to the Portland City Council. The City Council represents all Portlanders and meets to do the city's business. The presiding officer preserves order and decorum during the City Council meetings so that everyone can feel welcome, comfortable, respected, and safe. To participate in council meetings, you may sign up in advance with the council clerk's office for communications to speak briefly about any subject. You may also sign up for public testimony and resolutions or the first readings of ordinances. Your testimony should address the matter being considered at the time. When testifying, please state your name for the record. Your address is not necessary. Please disclose if you're a lobbyist. If you are representing an organization, please identify it. The presiding officer determines the length of testimony. Individuals generally have 3 minutes to testify unless otherwise stated. When you have 30 seconds left, a yellow light goes on. When your time is done, a red light goes on. If you are in the audience and would like to show your support for something that is said, please feel free to do a thumbs up. If you would like to express that you do not support something, please feel free to do a thumbs down. Disruptive conduct, such as shouting or interrupting testimony or council deliberations, will not be allowed. If there are disruptions, a warning will be given that further disruption may result in the person being ejected for the remainder of the meeting. After being ejected, a person who fails to leave the meeting is subject to arrest for trespass. Thank you for helping your fellow Portlanders feel welcome, comfortable, respected, and safe.
All right, first up is Resolution 951.
Direct staff to enter into the city's commitments for the Lent Stabilization and Job Creation Collaborative Oregon Solutions Declaration of Cooperation.
Colleagues, this resolution is focused on the Johnson Creek floodplain in the Lentz and Powellhurst-Gilbert neighborhoods, an area that's facing interconnected challenges relating to flooding, environmental health, economic development, and housing. In 2016, the Lentz Collaborative was designated and tasked with exploring strategic and cost-effective ways to keep the flood-prone areas of the Lentz and Powellhurst-Gilbert neighborhoods affordable and diverse, support job growth and business investment, mitigate flooding, and restore natural floodplain functions along Johnson Creek. Over the last 2 years, the city team, comprised of staff from 10 different bureaus and 10 different city bureaus and agencies, and Oregon Solutions have engaged multiple state and federal agencies, researchers from educational institutions, stakeholders from community organizations, and hundreds of business owners and residents in a process to identify solutions to advance the community's goals. The result of this process is a declaration of cooperation outlining priorities for action and specific commitments of each of the project partners. Going forward, the city will continue to work closely together to develop timelines and milestones to ensure that we're delivering on these commitments. My office convened participating bureaus for an initial implementation meeting the week before last, and will be holding another in the next couple of weeks. In addition to addressing issues related to flooding, the city's commitment in the declaration also include measures to help create jobs, preserve affordable housing options for residents, and enhance and improve community access to natural areas such as the Foster floodplain and Beggar's Tick Marsh. This project successfully highlights how Portland can take a coordinated approach towards the creation of more resilient and thriving communities, and exemplifies what we can accomplish when we work together as a community, as a city, and as a state. At this point, I'd like to pass this over to Commissioner Fish. Commissioner Fish.
I'm a little surprised that you did that, Mayor, but thank you.
I'm just going through my talking points, so welcome. Good morning, Nick. How are you today?
May I say that the beard is really coming in very nicely. I disagreed with some of your critics this morning, Mayor, but why don't I kick it?
They were a little harsh, weren't they?
Ted, why don't I kick it back to you?
Great. All right. So we have staff to come up and talk us through this. Greetings.
Hello.
Hello. I guess we're not as coordinated today as we should be.
It's a short week.
Afternoon session. We'll make it, though. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Representative, thanks for being here.
Mayor Wheeler, members of the Portland City Council. My name is Jeff Reardon, State Representative for District 48, and serving people of Southeast Portland and Happy Valley. And I really appreciate your having us in today for this important meeting. I am here today as co-convener alongside with fellow convener Michelle Rudd to recognize the work of the Lentz Stabilization and Job Creation Collaborative and to thank the city for their continued commitment and investment in the Powellhurst-Gilbert and Lentz communities. I believe the first time that we testified was August of 2016, and our collaborative had just been declared an Oregon Solutions Project by Governor Kate Brown, and we were here asking you to put your faith in us and support us in our mission to keep the neighborhoods affordable and diverse, to support job growth and business investment, and to enhance the Johnson Creek floodplain and wetlands. I'm very proud to say that 2 years later, we are on track to reaching our goals and have accomplished much already. A little over 3 years ago, when this project was in the beginning stage of development, I looked at the large list of collaborators and the interested parties and thought, how on earth is this going to stay on point with a group this large? We all know how challenging it is to work through a large bureaucracy. You do it every day. But from the beginning, I saw complete, dedicated commitment of everyone involved. I truly wish members of the public could experience what I did and see how dedicated and talented the people are that worked on this project. And I think they're a reflection of folks that work for our cities and other agencies across this great state. With the leadership of the Oregon Solutions Project team, the steering committee, and the city leads, this collaborative has produced a clear vision for the future of these neighborhoods and has already begun to make substantive improvements. Not only do I consider the collaborative a success on reaching our goals, but it also demonstrated that government can work together. And I hope that each of you will build on the accomplishments of this collaborative as we tackle the critical work that is still to come in Lentz and Powellhurst-Gilbert. The way that the collaborative has navigated within different city and state agencies, different jurisdictions, and different opinions and ideas has been impressive. It can be done. I'd like to let the group share with you in detail our accomplishments and commitments. They are the backbone of this collaborative, and I would like to recognize all of their dedication and hundreds of hours to the ongoing process of helping the most vulnerable residents stay in their homes, maintain family wealth, minimize flood risk, and to prevent community instability that comes with economic displacement. Mayor Wheeler, members of the council, thank you again for your investment and support and believing in my community.
Thank you. And it goes without saying, Representative, that you have been a primary mover of this entire process over a period of many years. And in fact, I want to just point out it was you who personally brought this to my attention for the first time a long time ago.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you for your diligent leadership at the state level. And more importantly, from our perspective as city commissioners, thank you for your attention to your constituents' needs. Thank you.
Thank you for your remarks. It's a wonderful partnership.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm Michelle Rudd. I am a member of your Planning and Sustainability Commission, and I think that's how I came to be involved in this. I've initially volunteered to be part of it because I saw it as an opportunity to really put some meat behind what we'd said we were doing in the Portland Plan in terms of wanting to support healthy, connected communities, promote having a healthy economy, supporting our youth, and doing it through an equity lens. And it's lived up to all those expectations. It's been very encouraging to see the bureaus working together and people not being wed to certain outcomes, being very data-driven and looking at what do we need to know to really best shepherd the city's resources, both in terms of talent and money, and then charting a course forward. So I'm hopeful that the city will maintain that type of investment and keep this moving forward. We often create plans, and there's always this worry that the plan will just sit on a shelf. And this is a case where work has actually been done. We have plans for moving forward, and we'll need the city's support to keep going. To highlight some of the real results we've seen here, part of the concern here was that with FEMA trying to get to cost recovery with flood insurance, people have their flood insurance rates screaming up at significant rates. And so you have the Lentz neighborhood, which has, is the most diverse part of the city, I think, and also has a lot of naturally occurring affordable housing. And the city saw an opportunity, and the collaborative saw an opportunity to help people before they are on the track toward homelessness, to keep people in their homes proactively. And working with the Housing Bureau, there was an ability to some very targeted resources into that community and help people right-size their insurance premiums because they were actually paying more than they should. I know with the Portland plan, we also talked a lot about being more efficient with how we use our industrial land and getting greater density of employment on the lands. And I think we have a much better understanding of the industrial land resources in that area now and are going to be in a good position to leverage that when opportunities arrive. Also from the planning perspective, I know that we've viewed East Portland as park deficient, and to the extent we're able to continue to do these flood restoration projects, when they're not serving as storage for floodwater, they also provide a green benefit to those communities. So when I'm not serving on the Planning Commission, I'm a land use lawyer, and so in that capacity, I've sometimes had frustration with government where you feel like everybody's in a different silo and people aren't talking to each other, and that really hasn't been the experience here, and it's a great model for how things should work going forward. The last thing I'll say is I was mentioning to Jeff before we came up that this was a situation where we knocked on the door and people said the government is here to help, and it actually was. There was really concrete benefit to people living within the floodplain, and I hope we'll continue to do that.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
My name is Nick Christensen. I'm a 10-year resident of the Lentz floodplain, and back of the napkin calculation, I've paid somewhere around $15,000 in those 10 years in flood insurance premiums. There's a lot of work that you've heard from already. You'll hear more from your staff, and there are reports on your desk. I don't want to talk too much about the successful short-term efforts that have been identified by the Oregon Solutions Project. I want to talk more about the future and the people who are living in the floodplain right now. It's very easy, first of all, to ask, why didn't you know this was going to happen? Why didn't you know you bought a house in the floodplain? There are a lot of folks in my neighborhood who bought their homes at a time when there was a mistake by FEMA, and that area was out of the floodplain. The mistake was corrected, and when people have gone to refinance or when their mortgage lenders have noticed, they're required to pick up flood insurance premiums that top $3,000 a year now. Those numbers are going up 18% a year because of decisions by the Tea Party Congress to match the FEMA flood insurance program to the actuarial rates. In my case, I found out the day before closing, surprise, your house is in a floodplain, and the cost was about $1,500 a year, and given that it was January 2009 and the world was collapsing and there was stability that was being dangled in front of me, seemed like a cost that we could eat. And then it went up 18% a year after that. And I started talking with BES about how we could work as a community and as a city to address this situation. So we have a situation where the city encouraged development many, many decades ago, more than a century ago, in an area that was believed to be safe, but turned out to have some risk. And the city and the county and Gresham and other places allowed development in other areas of Johnson Creek and the watershed, increasing runoff and flood risk. And here we are today. First off, I want to commend your staff on finding really innovative short-term solutions. They really drilled in and came up with creative, out-of-the-box ideas to cut the premium risk and to make homes more flood resilient. Given the uncertainties of climate change, however, it's essential that we not stop there. I want to, in particular, call out Jacob Sherman, Marie Walkowitz, Allison Wicks, and Andrea Mathiasen for going above and beyond in their dedication and creative thinking on this project. Moving forward, through this process, we learned that the current flood map may not be accurate. And I'm one of those homeowners who may be paying premiums unnecessarily. Others may have increased risk, and they may not know it. So it's essential that we have accurate floodplain maps. And it's important the city work on resources to support those homeowners who may find themselves unexpectedly in the floodplain to help ease the burden of potential insurance requirements. This process has helped to illustrate how previous mitigation and restoration work on Johnson Creek have been effective at reducing risk. If you look at the East Lens floodplain, it's been dramatic. If you've been out there during a flood event and you don't see Foster Road flooding, the work that BES did out there has really helped cut the 10-year flood risk. That doesn't solve our problem, but it does help make things better and less traumatic. This city has a long track record of successful mitigation and restoration projects. The city spent $16 million, for example, on Crystal Springs and Westmoreland, removing 33 acres from the floodplain in that area. That's the kind of commitment that I think we in East Portland would like to see. I would like to see the council talk about Beggar's Tick moving forward. It's an unfortunate name for a really important natural area. It's owned by Metro, which in full disclosure is my employer, although I am not representing them today. But its management is contracted to Portland Parks, and access is limited. Even though it's 5 blocks from my house, it's more than a mile walk to go enjoy that area. So it would be great to see Parks, BES, and Metro work with the community on a Beggar's Tick master plan, looking at access, environmental quality, and public safety in the area. You can't talk about Beggar's Tick without talking about what's around it. The junkyards to the south that flood, releasing auto chemicals into the creek. The industrial lots on the west side that are on cul-de-sacs. These are all important things that need to be a part of a future discussion. And finally, we need to remember that climate change continues to cause dramatic weather events and build resiliency into whatever happens going forward. We can't have this discussion without talking about gentrification. One of the reasons this project was underway was because displacement was happening in our community. People were selling their homes because they couldn't afford the insurance premiums. Developers were scraping them and building $450,000 homes that were above the floodplain. We all know change is going to occur, whether we act or not. So it's best to manage that change in a way that's consistent with our values. I want to reiterate that it's important for the City Council to lead on this. I don't think right now we can expect Lents to come together as a community and try and find a solution. Right now, my neighbors can't agree on what color the sky is. And so, unfortunately, we really need some help from City Hall on organizational capacity to try and move bigger solutions forward because of the amount of distrust that's come up in the last few years, especially in the wake of some citywide crises. Despite that, Lents is on the rise. You all know it. You've seen our town center with the new buildings, the new businesses, the affordable housing, and no copper penny. And with the exception of crime, Lents is a better place to live than a decade ago. The city's commitment to the community is working. Your commitment to my community is working. And now it's time to focus on the next stage, improving the environment, ensuring home security and access to nature. So thank you.
Very good, thank you. Any questions for this group, folks?
I just have
Commissioner
a
Fritz.
comment. Thank you all for your work on this, and it is a great project. And Mr. Christensen, fun fact about Beggar's Tick, we have a contract with Metro for parks to manage it, but Metro doesn't give us any money to do so. So I think in addition to your comments about doing a master plan, which would be a good thing, there needs to be some agreement about helping pay for services for all of the properties at Metro. So if you could, I know you're not at work right now, but just keep that in mind. Thank you.
Well, if I could add to that, Metro, well, you know this, Nick, I mean, you work at Metro, but for the benefit of the broader audience, Metro is thinking about another levy or bond effort in 2019 for natural areas, so that may be an issue that we can take up then. And I appreciate that, Nick, you took a moment to talk about Lents on the rise, because while I was listening to the testimony of all three distinguished guests today, I was making a list of all the things that have changed in the last 10 years in Lents, and it really is staggering. It's not just a more complete and healthy neighborhood, it's a destination for some of the great things in our community that are only going to get better, and that is a direct result of the kind of advocacy represented here and in the audience, so I congratulate you.
Thank you. Great, we'll take public testimony. Carla, how many folks do we have signed up?
I believe staff is going to
Oh, they are?
present.
Okay, and
Yes.
I'm sorry, I obviously didn't get the current
We're
run
sort
of
of
show,
flying
so.
by the seat of our pants.
That works. We'll get through it. Thank you. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, my name is Mike Jordan. I'm the Director of the Bureau of Environmental Services. Pleased to represent the city's involvement on the Lens Collaborative. With me today is Shannon Callahan from the Portland Housing Bureau and Kira Strassman, the Director of Development and Investment from Prosper Portland. They'll have some comments after mine. My comments will be a little bit abbreviated. There was a PowerPoint, but we're having a bit of technical difficulty, so I just plan to wing it a bit, if that's all right with you.
It's working for me. It should
working
work
for
for you
you.
too.
Great. This project started before I was with the city and will go on a lot longer, as you are beginning to hear. It has been a breakthrough project regarding our ability to collaborate both within the city, among bureaus, and interjurisdictionally with other levels of government and other local governments. So some of the things that came out of this project, as you've heard, it is certainly, at its core, a project to deal with flooding and floodplain restoration. However, the approach by this collaborative has been a more holistic approach for the whole neighborhood. We are looking at not only investments of capital to be able to mitigate for flooding, but programmatic investments to be able to work with homeowners to deal with what you heard is their major problem. Flooding, while annoying in this neighborhood, is not catastrophic. We found through our modeling that the heaviest floods would be no more than 3 feet, and in most of the area, only a few inches. And so flooding, while disturbing in the area, as Mr. Christensen noted, has gotten a lot better with some of our work. But what is really a challenge for many of the residents is the cost of flood insurance, this flood insurance program. And Shannon's going to talk a little bit about her program. And
I also have your PowerPoint.
you also have my PowerPoint.
Do your
But I
PowerPoint.
think I'm on a roll, and so if it's all right with you, Mr. Mayor, I think we'll just continue forward, because I think we can abbreviate this a bit. Again, the really high points about this program, we are going to be continue to make investments in flood mitigation in the area through BES's work in collaboration with Parks and with Metro and with other bureaus. We will not make as many large capital investments as we were planning on making, because while they may mitigate some flooding in a minor way, they won't mitigate against very large flooding. And you heard Mr. Christensen also mention climate change. And we are in the process of trying to understand what the impacts of climate change will be over the long term in this area. And that will go a lot to the mapping of the floodplain as we move forward also. So that's where BES will be. We will continue to be committed to this area and make improvements. They also will not only be helpful to homeowners, but you'll also hear from Prosper that businesses will be benefited in this area. They are already significant employers of family wage jobs in the area, and our job, I think, is to help them mitigate against minor flooding, continue to do that, and perhaps help with some of the infrastructure investments that they'll need to grow their businesses in the future. With that, I think I will turn it over to Shannon and Kira to talk about their involvement.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioner. Shannon Callahan from the Portland Housing Bureau. It was the Housing Bureau's privilege to actively participate in the Oregon Solutions Project. We were able to engage hundreds of community members, build effective partnerships, and ultimately reduce housing costs for low and moderate income households in the floodplain. During the early stages of our community outreach work, we heard specific concerns from the community regarding the rising costs of flood insurance. The Housing Bureau and Habit and Green Lens pioneered a flood insurance savings program to help stabilize homeowners. The program offered free and low-cost elevation certificates, home assessments, and insurance counseling to help community members save money. The program was a success. It provided more than 30% of the active flood insurance policyholders in the floodplain assistance and saved low and moderate income homeowners an average of $650 a year on their flood insurance program. In our work on the project, we also learned a lot about the lack of knowledge and information that insurance agents had about flood insurance and the intricacies of the National Flood Insurance Program. Working with Representative Reardon, we were able to advocate for new state rules to better protect flood insurance policyholders, resulting in Oregon becoming just the 5th state in the nation to require continuing education regarding flood insurance for insurance providers. I'd really like to thank the entire collaborative team that we were able to partner with, the co-sponsors, and acknowledge the hard work and dedication of the Housing Bureau's project lead, Mr. Jacob Sherman. So thank you very much.
Good afternoon. I'm Kira Strausman with Prosper Portland. Thank you, Mayor, Commissioners, for inviting us here to present. I want to thank our Bureau partners and Oregon Solutions. We at Prosper are dedicated to continue to work collaboratively to see Lentz continue to thrive. Both the Prosper Portland Strategic Plan and the Lentz 5-year Action Plan are clear about our commitment to support existing businesses and middle-wage job growth in the Lentz industrial area. The East Foster industrial area is home to nearly 100 businesses, close to 12,000 workers with an annual payroll of $45 million a year. The mix of construction and manufacturing businesses includes auto-oriented firms, food manufacturing and distribution. Our studies as part of this project concluded that industrial and employment lands have low vacancy rates and are well utilized with middle wage jobs for East Portland. Those are jobs that pay $42,000 a year or more, but require less than a bachelor's degree to attain. Middle wage job growth is especially important in low-income neighborhoods, for communities of color, for East Portland. Prosper Portland will continue to support property owners and businesses in this area so they can invest in their properties and grow, continue to provide good-paying jobs for the community, and when they can build in a way that doesn't impact the floodplain or the Johnson Creek. Prosper Portland supports the work of our Bureau partners and will continue to work collaboratively as the Declaration of Cooperation moves forward. I want to thank my colleague Allison Wicks, who did the bulk of the work on this project for us at Prosper, and the Lentz community members who helped us to understand the challenges of working and living in the floodplain.
Mr. Mayor, if I may close.
Please, yeah, of course.
All of the content work that the bureaus have been involved in, that other public partners have been involved in, and that other nonprofits have been involved in this collaborative, the substantive work is all important, and much of it will go on. I think the most important thing about this is that we've proved to ourselves and to each other that we can work together over a long period of time and persist in a neighborhood that has some challenges. And our commitment, I think, as bureaus going forward is to continue that collaboration, continue to persist in engaging with the community on solutions that can work. I think that's the biggest learning in this for us, and it's inspiring. And I want to thank Marie Walkowitz and Lisa Huntington for their work. I'm a latecomer to this process, and they've done yeoman's work over a number of years, and this doesn't happen without great leadership and someone who will persist and keep us at the table and keep us working. So I really want to thank Representative Reardon and Michelle Redd for their leadership throughout this process. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you. How many folks do we have signed up, Carla?
We have 4 people.
Very good.
Okay, the first 3, please come on up, are Noelwa Natusil, Daniel Newberry, and Carolee Harrison.
Name for the record, please. We do not need your address unless you want to give it to us. Let us know if you're a lobbyist. And other than that, the mics move around, and about 6 to 8 inches is about right. Welcome.
Thank you. Mayor Wheeler and members of the City Council, thank you for the opportunity to testify. My name is Noelle Winnetisel, and I am the Stanley H. Cohn Professor of Economics at Reed College. I have also participated on the Lentz Collaborative Project Team. For the past 20 years, my research has estimated the effect of environmental amenities and land use practices on the sale price of properties in the Portland area. My current research explores the effect of the FEMA 100-year floodplain on property sale prices in the Johnson Creek watershed. I estimate that from 1988 to 2014, properties in the 100-year floodplain sold, on average, for 21.5% less than those outside the floodplain. What caused this discount? My findings point to the cost of flood insurance. This highlights the importance of reducing flood insurance rates, which the mayor and city council have supported by funding the Flood Insurance Savings Program. This program decreased the average cost of flood insurance for participants by $650, which translates into a net present value of savings for property owners of almost $13,000 over the life of a 30-year mortgage. As stated by one program participant, quote, "The flood insurance savings program has enabled me to keep my house," unquote. This innovative program has received national attention because it enacts a key principle to reform flood insurance, using a property-specific, risk-based assessment to determine a property's flood insurance rate. Publicity about this program attracted the attention of the two leading flood insurance economists in the United States at Wharton's Risk and Decision Center at the University of Pennsylvania. A research team comprised of myself, two researchers from Wharton, and Jacob Sherman at the Portland Housing Bureau have developed a survey that will investigate flood literacy, perceptions of flood risk, and willingness to pay for flood insurance in the Lentz and Powellhurst-Gilbert neighborhoods. The survey is ongoing, but preliminary results show that a majority of homeowners in the 100-year floodplain learned about their property's flood risks and insurance costs at closing or after moving into their new home. Transparency in real estate transactions is essential. I urge the council to consider mechanisms that will allow buyers and sellers to have full and complete information much earlier in the process. I commend the agency staff I've worked with as part of the Lentz team for their outstanding work and leadership. Their evidence-based approach to developing public policy is the approach we need to ensure that public funds are being used in a way that has the maximum possible benefit. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
Can I ask you a question, Professor?
Commissioner Fish.
We so rarely have someone who's a representative of the dismal science of economics, so
thank
want to take full advantage of it. We heard from someone previously that transparency would be wonderful, but we still have some questions about mapping integrity. Who's in and who's out. And
Right.
So how do we resolve those questions?
There was some very good work done by Gary Wolf as part of this process, and that was presented to members of the Lentz Collaborative Project team that showed, using the most advanced hydrological models, what the 100-year inundation levels would be, and having much greater transparency. A lot of our survey respondents talked about getting access to information about the floodplain through portlandmaps.com, which was great, through FEMA, through outreach from the city. But having that information, are you in a floodplain, yes or no, but even more continuous information, because it's not this, you step a foot outside of the 100-year floodplain and all of a sudden the risk goes to zero. It's a continuous measure of flood risk.
Yeah, not long ago, this council mandated that you get an energy score on your house, and that, as you might imagine, faced some resistance in the industry, but is now the law of the city. And it seems to me that when you look at the Declaration of Cooperation and you can sort of project forward as the things we can tangibly do where the city can add value, we can put this issue in our legislative agenda to make sure that there is pressure in Washington to have reasonable and fair insurance. The idea that those rates are galloping at 18% annual increases is not sustainable for any family, so
Right.
that's a problem. We certainly have within our authority to deal with these transparency issues and making sure there's full disclosure.
Great.
But I'll want to, one of the things that I will be interested in, because I now have both BES and Parks, and we're looking at some partnerships between the two bureaus, and from what I've learned about this cluster of issues, I think there's a couple of candidates here where we can bring Parks and BES to the table collaboratively, is how we get the mapping right. because it shouldn't depend on whether on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, you get a different read at closing. We should be able to have some real clarity about whether you're in or you're out and what's the consequence of that. And then who bears the risk and the liability if it's wrong. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
I also had a follow-up question. Thank you for your testimony. You mentioned that there is a disclosure problem. People mentioned that they're in a floodplain either at the closing or perhaps even worse, after the closing. Are there any prohibitions at the state level that would preclude us from taking a look at that at the local level that you're aware of?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon.
Thank you. My name is Daniel Newberry. I am the Executive Director of the Johnson Creek Watershed Council and have been a stakeholder in the Oregon Solutions Project for the past 2 years. So thank you, Mayor Wheeler and City Council members, for this opportunity to voice my support for the Lentz Collaborative. Environmental justice is a concern of the Johnson Creek Watershed Council, and it's a term I think that's been given a lot of lip service in the past couple of years. But I think this project is a really good example of how you can really take the principles of environmental justice and put them into action. We've heard from several speakers so far about the benefits of to low-income housing owners of the flood insurance work that's been done through this project. You've heard that for many Lentz residents, that has been going up 15 to 20% a year, in some case in excess of $2,000. So I think this program may actually be helping some Portlanders staying in their homes, which I think is very, very positive. Another important piece of work that the Lentz Collaborative has been working on is floodplain restoration to reduce floodings for homeowners and businesses. This work really goes back 20 years for the City of Portland to the Willing Sellers Program and subsequent creation of Foster Floodplain. I think it's interesting to point out that in December 2015, when we had the last big flood, that the peak flow in Johnson Creek was actually higher then than it was in the big 1996 flood. And I think that's really important to point out, because I think a lot of it is really a result of the floodplain restoration work, both Foster Floodplain and some other places upstream, that's actually worked to reduce flooding for a lot of residents. And it's, I think, worthwhile work that the city's Bureau of Environmental Services has been doing. And it's science-based work. It's continued through the Lentz Collaborative here, and I just want to thank all of you for making available the staff time for the 3 bureaus that have been involved here, the Housing Bureau, Bureau of Environmental Services, Prosper Portland, and I'm hoping this work can continue, especially with support and blessing, including financial support from the City Council, so I wanted to say thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Carol Lee Harrison, and I've lived in Lentz for 10 years. I'm on the classified staff at Portland State University, and I'm also a graduate student in urban history there, and my master's thesis research has to do with floods, flood control, and suburban development in the neighborhood. I'm here to tell you about my experience with the flood insurance savings program as a resident, and I don't believe it's an exaggeration to say that my participation in this program has enabled me to keep my home. I recently heard a realtor refer to Lentz as Portland's last affordable neighborhood, and I believe that was true for me when I bought my house on my own in 2008. But I quickly discovered that my situation there was potentially unaffordable. I didn't know until closing my loan that flood insurance was mandatory for my location, or that the cost of insurance that I was required to buy would rise at a rate that would outpace my income and my ability to save money. In 2008, my annual premium for flood insurance was just over $900 a year. But by 2014, it had risen to $1,400, and it was projected to rise at a steeper rate in the future. So as my payments climbed, I lost the ability to save towards maintenance of my home, and my daily budget, my everyday budget, was significantly tightened. This insurance, by the way, is against a flood that has only a 1% chance of occurring in any year. So the danger of losing my home because I could not afford to insure it was much more real to me than the risk of losing it to a 100-year flood. The elevation survey that the flood insurance savings program provided to me, which is a cost I couldn't have absorbed, showed that my house, or the insurable part of my property, was on higher ground than the 100-year floodplain. So representatives from Inhabit quickly communicated with FEMA about that information on my behalf, and with the help of an insurance agent who specialized in flood policy, I'm now released from the obligation of paying flood insurance. Without this support, I and many of my neighbors would still be paying an arbitrary and expensive policy, which is based on an outdated federal map, rather than having our insurance needs determined by the actual lay of the land. My research as a student has revealed many ways in which the federal and local governments have worked with property owners on the problem of Johnson Creek's flooding for the last 100 years. Flooding's never stood alone as an issue on the Lentz floodplain, but going household by household is only part of the solution. But if I'm an example, this individualized program has changed my fortune as a homeowner and as an actor in the neighborhood's economy and its environment. I'm very grateful for the support I've received, and I hope that the city and the state government will continue to invest in programs like this that help all residents and businesses in Lentz thrive with Johnson Creek as our neighborhood grows. Thanks for hearing my testimony today.
Thank you. Great testimony, all three of you. We appreciate it. And there was one more person, is that right, Carla?
Yes.
Very good.
Judy Lowe.
Just call me Lonesome Low. Good afternoon, Mayor Wheeler and City Council members. Thank you for having me here today. Today, I think, is a celebration about the Lentz Stabilization and Job Creation Collaborative. But I do want to mention that in 1996, I was here. I think you were also, when we were talking about the Lentz urban renewal as a potential. And now it has come to be. And now Lentz is, I think it's on the move. However, and the Lentz neighborhood is comprised of non-white and American citizen applicants primarily. But today is a celebration, and I want to focus on the festivities and confine my remarks to that topic. So I'm going to read this to you. It should take less than a minute, and I hope you find it somewhat amusing. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. I share initials with the author of that quote, which happens to be on the Statue of Liberty. That could describe Lentz, except we don't see ourselves as being the wretched refuse of a teeming shore. We're proud of our floodplain and of our neighborhood. I've had the privilege of being a volunteer member of the Lentz Stabilization and Job Creation Collaborative, and I'd like to stretch that out a little bit. It's the Lentz Stabilization and Job Creation Collaborative. Those words are significant when strung together because together it represents what I'm here asking you to help me celebrate. I admire and respect the expertise around the table and the dedication demonstrated by Michael Mills and Deb Myhoff and their team for doing the heavy lifting. I'd like to express gratitude to Governor Kate Brown for establishing our floodplain as an Oregon Solutions project, which I believe she signed it on July 16th. So we're very, very close to that anniversary. To co-conveners, Jeff Reardon and Michelle Rudd, for devoting their time and energy to keeping us on track, and to the city bureaus that have earned their pay at the drawing board, seeking solutions, restoring the floodplain's natural habitat, and their persistent efforts to assist Lentizens with budget-breaking flood insurance costs. The Lentz Stabilization and Job Creation Collaborative is an example of what can be accomplished when focused effort is devoted to an issue. I'm looking forward to focusing on the job creation segment of this project. Disaster preparedness for something that's difficult to imagine is not a priority. Preparing for the yearly rise in Johnson Creek and the resulting tangible ramifications is something Lentz is concerned with every rainy day. It's no easy task to protect us from ourselves in anticipation of a natural disaster. Mother Nature wasn't at the table, so we don't know when she'll deliver the 100-year flood. A Cascadia subduction event could wipe out these efforts. At least now, some of our Lentizens' homes are stabilized in the floodplain, so we've done the best we can with what we've had to work with. It's not over yet. There's still the job creation portion of this project to tackle. I'm looking forward to working with the Lentz Stabilization and Job Creation Collaborative as much as possible. I'm just one Lentz resident doing my part, and I thank you for doing yours.
Thank you. All right, with that, colleagues, if you don't have any further questions, we'll call the roll.
Saltzman?
Well, this is a very exciting Oregon Solutions project, and it sounds like it's really producing good, tangible results in the terms of removing people from the floodplain who didn't belong there in the first place, or reducing flood insurance premiums, as well as community building. So a lot to like about this. Aye.
Udaley?
Well, thanks for the presentation and everyone who came to testify today. This is a great program. I'm happy to vote aye.
Fritz?
Thank you in particular for the citizens of Lentz, and by that I mean everybody who lives in the former city of Lentz and who now is proud to be there. This has been a long time, as it was mentioned, 100 years or more. My involvement was started about 20 years ago with Ivy Francis of the Bureau of Environmental Services developing the Brookside project, which was, I think, one of the first combination, let's make a park at the same time as we're making a flood storage facility, and it has really blazed the way. And when I first moved to Portland 32 years ago, flooding in Lentz was several times a winter. It seemed like, never mind, just once a winter. Now it hits the headlines again, and that's a good thing, that if it floods in Lentz, it's unusual. And so really remarkable changes over the course of time. I think Commissioner Sam Adams and then Mayor Sam Adams put in a tremendous amount of effort into buying homes in the floodplain and also doing these flood storage projects. So they have created good jobs over the years, which has been another thing. But this is really an example of people say that city government can't have the bureaus work together. Well, yeah, we can. Actually, we could do quite a lot, if the truth be known. And not only have the bureaus work together well, but other jurisdictions and the community has as well. So thank you for celebrating with us. Thank you to my colleagues who've been leading this project over the past several years. Aye.
Fish?
Well, I've had in my 10 years on this council, I've been involved in a number of these Oregon Solutions projects. Two that come to mind are the Thousand Gardens and Gateway Green. And what was a little different about the declarations of cooperation that came out of those processes is they were a little more prescriptive. And I would say that this document is more aspirational. And so what I want to encourage the leadership, and I want to thank Jeff Reardon and Michelle Rudd and everybody who put so much time into this, is to think in terms of the next steps and what are the concrete things. I don't have to say this to Jeff because he's not shy about coming forward to council, but you know, we have areas of influence. And it may be as you come back and do the 6th and 12-month checkup, which is required under the terms of the declaration, it may be that you have on your wish list our legislative agenda, perhaps some research into how far we can push the limits of disclosure in real estate transactions. There may be some other things around mapping and making sure that people have some confidence about, you know, where they are or are not when they purchase property. But I would encourage you to go from the more general case that this is framed in terms of to the specific initiatives that you want. And in that regard, Commissioner Saltzman reminded me a few minutes ago that the last time that we had both Parks and BES together was when Dan had both. And just like the last time we had the utilities under a single commissioner, that was under Dan Saltzman. I seem to trail him in terms of these leadership opportunities. It's not lost on me as I listen to the testimony and review the documents that BES and Parks are going to be, along with the Housing Bureau and Metro and others, really critical drivers of the next chapter of the success of Lentz. And so what I would encourage my friends that are here today to do is start thinking about what are some partnerships between Parks and BES that can drive some of the things that you want to see as the next chapter. I mean, the obvious one is what Commissioner Fritz alluded to a few minutes ago, which is the Beggars Tick Master Plan. You know, you've got now 2 of the 3 key partners now unified. Metro needs to be brought to the table, but, you know, where does that rank in terms of a priority? How we deploy parks rangers in terms of managing our natural areas and our parks in that area is an important question, and one that impacts both assets of BES and assets of parks. Could go on and on and on. Under Commissioner Fritz's leadership, big investments have been made at Leach Botanical Garden. Zanger Farm has some aspirations about expanding its footprint. There's a lot of cool stuff going on in that greater area. The one thing I'm not sure about is whether it's the most diverse community in our city. And I think I'd have to take a look at the most recent data on both the New Columbia and on Cully, but it's got to be top 5. And there's been so many changes in the neighborhood, but it is an important place. So my commitment as the freshly minted commissioner in charge of both parks and BES is to work with you to identify some priorities. And I think we do our best work when we move from the aspirational to the concrete. We pick a couple of projects to work with, and we say, let's spend the next couple of years getting it right. So I look forward to doing that. And then finally, I'll just say that a number of people said that Lentz is on the rise. I felt that uniquely when I joined with the mayor and many of you at the dedication of the House of Love and Kindness. And I wish that we could cut the ribbon on a House of Love and Kindness in every neighborhood in the city. And this, of course, was the Asian Health and Family Center, Dr. Zito's longtime dream. A beautiful building, but I love the name. If we ever in our history needed more houses of love and kindness, it is today. So thanks to everyone who brought this to this stage. I'm a big fan of Oregon Solutions and the work they do, and thanks to the governor for prioritizing this and putting the A-team on it. And let's get to work. Aye.
Wheeler.
So I am very pleased to be perhaps the Johnny-come-lately to this process. And again, I want to thank Michelle, and I want to thank Representative Reardon. I want to thank all of you who participated in the tour when I had a chance to come out and take a look at the neighborhood, look at some of the assets, evaluate the floodplain. And I have to say, I left feeling highly energized about not only where the community is today, but where it is headed. And let's not forget the opportunities around job growth and job creation in Lentz. I think there are many, many tremendous opportunities there as well. First of all, I want to just react to some of the things we heard today, because I think they're very important. Number one, it is very clear that the folks that we represent are not getting full information when they are purchasing real estate in Lentz. And I don't want to dissuade anybody from living in Lentz, because I think it's a terrific family neighborhood, but there should be full disclosure, because there are consequences, real financial consequences to living in a floodplain. And given the amount of time that this council spends talking about keeping people in their houses, this is not an inconsequential cost, as we heard from one of the folks who is testifying today. Number two, we heard that there are people who are actually paying for flood insurance who should not be. And as Commissioner Fish rightly points out, that is in part due to the fact that the data is not quality data. And while we could all quibble about what are the core responsibilities, what are the core obligations of government, I hope we could all agree that at a minimum, we should be providing accurate information. And I'm pleased that the city's taken a leadership role in trying to provide that accurate information. I obviously want to thank not only Jeff and Michelle, I want to thank everybody who is on the collaborative. I want to thank our city staff at Prosper Portland, the Planning and Sustainability Bureau, the Housing Bureau, and the Bureau of Environmental Services. I want to second what everybody said. When I got here, I was told, the city of Portland is siloed, nobody talks to anybody, and nobody's accountable for anything. There are probably areas of policy where we could do better. In fact, I will say factually, there are areas of policy where we could do better. But this is an area where the collaboration has been strong. The leadership of the bureaus is aligned and shares the passion of the community members who brought this forward. I want to thank the Oregon Solutions staff, and I want to thank the governor for recognizing this as an important project in our community. And I want to thank the staff at the Regional Solutions and the state and federal agencies, both that provided technical assistance along the way. And most importantly, I just want to thank the hundreds of community members who are engaged and involved in this process, not only those on the collaborative, but those who provided their insights that helped inform this process along the way. And has been said many times, so I'll just underscore it one more time. This is our entry card to begin the process, to begin the real work of providing those solutions, those tangible solutions. And the presence of State Representative Reardon as a leader of this project here in this council chamber, I hope demonstrates a commitment at both the local and the state level to work together with our regional partners, with community organizations, to continue to push this work forward. And I look forward to seeing what we can do in the next 10 years. I think it's going to be fantastic. I appreciate your all being here. I vote aye. The resolution is adopted. Thank you, everybody.
We'll take a 2-minute break just to clear the room.
2-minute break. We're in recess for 2 minutes. Thank you. That was a great testimony.
Okay.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks, Professor. Your class would be interesting. If I had time, I'd take it.
Do you remember Zach Levin?
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Approve changes to Plan for Portland Committee on Community Engaged Policing and establish committee.
Commissioner Fish, just kidding. Colleagues, we're here today not only
Easy target.
we're here today not only to approve changes to the PSEP plan, but also to formally establish the Portland Committee on Community Engaged Policing by resolution. In the coming week, I'll make my final selection for the members of the Portland Committee on Community Engaged Policing, also known as the PCCEP, sometimes PSEP. I have to say, I'm energized by the future of PSEP. This has been a long road. Some would probably argue, not inaccurately, maybe a little bit too long, but the work has culminated in these amendments, and the thoughtfulness and creativity in the work of the PSEP facilitators reassure me that this was the level of community engagement initially contemplated by the settlement agreement. I want to take a moment to single out and thank the Albina Ministerial Alliance for Police Reform and Justice, otherwise known as AMAC. They've been a necessarily critical voice in the development of this committee, and they've worked with my office and the PSEP facilitators to arrive at a place of understanding and collaboration. Their role in the settlement agreement is an important one, and it should not be understated. We need the AMAC's voice in this process, and I'm appreciative of the time they've spent considering the PSEP plan and offering their input. I'm confident that every single applicant I interviewed has the experience and the perspective to take on this challenging and meaningful work. The changes to the PSEP plan we're talking about today are largely based on the recommendations of our excellent facilitators. I see Brandon Lee here from the Training for Transformation. Thank you for being here, Brandon, and for all your hard work on this. I'd also like to acknowledge Hun Teng of Training for Transformation, and Brad Taylor of the Brad Taylor Group, who unfortunately could not be here today. Together, they are the three PSEP facilitators. Our facilitators propose changes based on best practices and their experience in doing this kind of work. The proposed changes give us a chance to maximize community engagement, as well as to make changes that will make it easier for PSEP members to fully participate in the process. This is not business as usual. We have a chance to make a truly effective and transformational committee. In order for this to happen, I want to make sure that we're creating a smart framework for this committee based on the recommendation of experts. The PSEP facilitators began this work in May. They took a trauma-informed approach to outreach and prioritized outreach to people with mental health conditions, people with a disability, youth, the houseless community, the LGBTQ community, immigrants and refugees, and the Black, Native, and Latinx communities. We received over 100 applications for the PSEP board. I completed the interviews last week with 17 adults and 6 high school-aged youth, and I'm happy to share that I have a very difficult decision to make. All of them were exceptional candidates. I'll be announcing my appointees and alternates within the next 2 weeks. Until then, I'm thrilled to move the work of the PSEP forward by supporting these amendments. Nicole Grant, who is my senior advisor, is here with the PSEP program manager to explain what these amendments will accomplish and to answer any questions my colleagues may have about these amendments and the committee's work or the facilitators or the work itself. So with that, I'll turn it over to Nicole. Thanks for being here.
Mayor, Commissioners, good afternoon. I'll introduce myself for the record. My name is Nicole Grant, Senior Policy Advisor for Mayor Wheeler. I'm here today with Mandy Hood, Project Manager for the Portland Committee on Community Engaged Policing, affectionately known as the PSEP. You know, as the Mayor said, this has been a long road. In August 2017, Council approved amendments to the settlement agreement, notably the framework for the newly conceived PSEP. In April of this year, the city presented those amendments to Judge Simon at a status conference and fairness hearing. With the exception of the PSEP plan, all amendments received approval from Judge Simon. The PSEP plan was conditionally approved by Judge Simon, pending an update to be given next month. We're here today to offer changes to the PSEP plan at the recommendation of our outstanding PSEP facilitators, Training for Transformation and the Brad Taylor Group, and to establish the PSEP formally for the Portland community. I'm also happy to report that the DOJ has formally approved the changes to the PSEP plan. Before delving into those changes before you today, I've asked Mandy Hood to set the stage for those changes and the resolution that you are approving. Mandy has been instrumental in her work as the PSEP project manager. She brings with her institutional knowledge from her work with the Community Oversight and Advisory Board, the COAB, and a keen understanding of issues affecting those with mental health conditions. In this work, she has been a partner, a critical voice, and an advocate. She has shepherded this process from the selection of the facilitators by the Facilitator Evaluation Committee to where we are today. Before passing the microphone on to her, I'd like to formally thank her in this setting and on the record for the commitment and sheer heart she has brought to this process. So, thank you. You didn't know I was going to say all of that.
I didn't. Thank you so much, Nicole. That means a lot to me. Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Mandy Hood. I'm the project manager for the Portland Committee on Community Engaged Policing. In April of this year, an evaluation committee selected Training for Transformation and the Brad Taylor Group to serve as the PSEP facilitators. That evaluation committee was comprised of Frida Caesar, Director of Equity and Inclusion at Central City Concern, Dana Coffey, Portland Commission on Disability, Jan Friedman, Attorney for Disability Rights Oregon, Janie Gullickson, Executive Director of the Mental Health Association of Oregon, Kalei Lubin, who is in the audience today and is a member of the AMAC, Daniel Portis-Cathers, a member of the NAACP, and myself. Though the city initially sought one facilitator, the evaluation committee felt strongly that the top two candidates working together would best serve the PSEP and the communities of Portland. Training for Transformation, led by Hoon Tang and Brandon Lee, is an Oregon state-certified minority business enterprise that specializes in equity-focused community building between law enforcement and the diverse residents they serve. Hoon is a peace builder whose background includes art, reconciliation, public involvement, and conflict transformation. Brandon brings lived experience as a survivor of numerous racial profiling cases, served as legal redress committee chairman for the NAACP, and worked to fund the Community Police Review Board in Oakland, California. The Brad Taylor Group is an Oregon state-certified emerging small business specializing in developing communication strategies through training seminars, conflict resolution, and facilitation services. Brad Taylor has worked as a direct line social worker, empowering residents living in supportive housing, as a homeless outreach worker advocating for some of Portland's most vulnerable residents, and as a mobile mental health crisis response worker for Multnomah County. The PSEP facilitators began work on May 10. With a limited amount of time, they hit the ground running. Their outreach strategy focused on removing barriers to participation for historically marginalized communities and empowering Portlanders with lived experience to take lead in city processes. An emphasis was placed on obtaining quality applications instead of simply amassing a large number of applicants. Per the PSEP plan, a selection advisory committee comprised of representatives from each council office was selected to develop the written application and selection criteria for the PSEP. The selection advisory committee members are Dr. Cynthia Fowler, psychiatrist and chair of the health committee for the NAACP, appointed by Commissioner Saltzman. Julie Ramos, mental health advocate and recent vice chair of the Citizen Review Committee, appointed by Commissioner Fritz. Museo Lowell, chairman of the Somali American Council of Oregon, appointed by Commissioner Udaley. Babin Singh, executive director of the Oregon Justice Resource Center, appointed by Commissioner Fish. And Daryl Walker, psychologist and executive director of Cascadia Behavioral Health, appointed by Mayor Wheeler. In addition to the facilitators' outreach efforts, the Selection Advisory Committee, council staff, and I all engaged in a broad outreach strategy to reach as many Portlanders as possible. This included presenting at community meetings, hosting informational sessions, and having targeted and informal conversations within our networks. Because of this effort, as Mayor Wheeler said, we received over 100 applications from the Portland community to serve on the PSEP. Outside of the development of the written application, neither the mayor's office nor council offices were involved in any part of the Selection Advisory Committee's selection process. Discussion around who to interview and final recommendations to the mayor were the sole responsibility of the Selection Advisory Committee. The process was intentionally structured this way in order to ensure the fairness and preserve the integrity of the process. When reviewing written applications and interviewing candidates, the Selection Advisory Committee focused on the following areas when assessing applicants: lived experience as a member of a marginalized community, lived experience with mental or physical health issues, interpersonal skills, experience working within or advocating for marginalized communities, and experience utilizing social services and engaging in government processes. The Selection Advisory Committee provided its recommendations to the mayor, listing the candidates they believe should be on the PSEP along with alternates. The mayor's office consulted with the commissioner offices before the mayoral interviews and will be meeting with the Selection Advisory Committee and council offices this week to discuss the candidates. In addition to the mayor, of course, each mayoral interview was attended by Nicole Grant, Jared Hager from the U.S. Attorney's Office, a PSEP facilitator, and a member of the Selection Advisory Committee. The PSEP facilitators and I are currently working to confirm retreat and training plans for the PSEP. The retreat will provide PSEP members with the time and space to get to know one another, begin to coalesce as a group, and gain clarity on their work and mission, as well as develop an organizational structure for the PSEP. Training will continue beyond the retreat process. The facilitators and I will be connecting soon with community members and stakeholder groups to discuss and receive feedback about training ideas and resources. In addition to the training topics outlined in the PSEP plan, topics will include training on institutional racism, understanding mental health from the perspective of those with lived experience, and lessons learned from the COAB process. Given the importance of the work of this community and the need to thoughtfully build relationships with community members, the PSEP will spend October and part of November continuing their training and engaging the community with the expectation of holding their first community meeting in November. The mayor's office has agreed to continue holding monthly forums on public safety until the PSEP has its first meeting in order to keep the community engagement and conversation continuing.
Thank you, Mandy. So in the interest of time, I'd like to walk you all through the major changes being requested today. These changes have been reviewed by the AMAC and Portland Police Association, and we have incorporated their feedback. Our facilitators also met with the AMAC on 2 different occasions to discuss their plans for the PSEP as well. Last August, City Council, made a commitment to the AMAC to establish an 11-member committee. So if you recall, the PSEP plan calls for 9 to 11, so we made a formal commitment for an 11-member committee. The eligibility criteria for the PSEP permits Portlanders who are 16 years and older to serve on this board. Knowing that there was a possibility that high school-aged youth would apply to this board, it was important to place intention behind the call to action that we extended to that generation. We needed to meaningfully facilitate youth participation. With these amendments, the committee will be expanded from 11 to 13. The additional 2 seats are reserved for youth who will serve together during the school year. A separate process for youth has also been carved out in order to adhere to best practices for youth-adult partnerships. So rather than one-on-one interviews will be conducted and have been conducted in a group setting. Like the adults, youth members will be voting members. Though this is not spelled out in the plan itself, our facilitators will work to ensure that youth voices are honored and respected, and adult mentors will be identified for each youth member. Prior to the first meeting, and this is another change, members are expected to attend PPB's Community Academy and participate in a ride-along. That said, these changes contemplate the provision of reasonable accommodations for each. Though the PSEP plan sets forth options in this regard, the city recognizes that reasonable accommodations must be established through direct engagement with the affected person. These changes in the PSEP plan provide a floor for those accommodations, rather than setting parameters around what they may be. Additionally, meetings will now be held on a monthly basis instead of twice monthly out of concern for the time commitment that we have been asking of PSEP members. And they will generally be open to the public with an opportunity for public comment before the conclusion of deliberations and voting. PSEP facilitators will ensure that no votes are taken without the public having the opportunity to be present. Wrong page. PSEP will also now be able to form subcommittees that meet at other times during the month. Subcommittee meetings must be open to the public and allow the public an opportunity to provide input. And I'll use that as a moment or a point to say, opportunity to say, that the PSEP plan really is a floor for this work rather than setting kind of finite parameters around kind of the work of committee members. So to that end, rather than requiring the format of town halls and roundtables, the facilitators are looking to break the mold of community engagement around policing. Their focus will be on gathering input from Portlanders in culturally responsive ways. So with that said, I would like to invite Brandon Lee of Training for Transformation to introduce himself, his work, and the facilitators' plans for community engagement.
Well, I have one question before we move on.
Sure, Commissioner Fitch.
So I understand you mentioned there would be training materials and a retreat to set clear expectations of all members of PSEP. Given the work we've done in creating reforms of our system of boards and commissions, can I assume that this is being coordinated with Judy Prosper?
Correct.
So that we're doing all the hard work at the front end of making sure we understand what's the status of people who serve on this body, what
Correct.
body rules apply, and that people understand what they can and can't do with emails and other kinds of things?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Brandon.
Hello. First, I want to acknowledge the mayor and all of the commissioners. Thank you for your time. And all right, so I'll begin with, is there a particular question or you want to begin with introduction?
Yeah.
Mr. Lee, could you just identify yourself for the record? Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
So my name is Brandon Lee. For the record, I am co-founder and president of Training for Transformation, LLC. So we began this work, our brand is referred to as community conscious policing. And one of the jobs that I've taken on is, I began as someone who suffered from racial profiling. And when I was at Oregon State University as a faculty member, this is a few years ago, there were not only in the media a lot of conflict between police and community, but even on our campus, there were hate crimes occurring, and there just wasn't support for the students that I worked with. It was through that process that I reached out to our local law enforcement agency, and through our engagement at that time, I was with NAACP. Working together, we came up with this, what we refer to now as community conscious policing, where we offered training opportunities where we brought law enforcement and community into the same room. So we hope to bring the skills that we have gleaned through those processes to the PSEP. And you've heard some of the recommendations that we made in terms of processes to bring community and law enforcement together here in Portland. And I'm here to offer any more details in terms of how we can support this PSEP process.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brandon. So I gave Carla earlier a list of proposed amendments, additional amendments to the PSEP plan. These are fairly minor. I'll wait until they're handed out.
Thanks, Carla.
So the First Amendment kind of follows our conversations with the AMAC. And we wish to clarify that community gatherings will happen on a quarterly basis. These changes are not meant to reduce in any way the level of community engagement initially contemplated by the PSEP plan. So the First Amendment is to simply add language that ensures the gathering of input from Portlanders on a quarterly basis. The sentence would read, under members' responsibilities, on a quarterly basis, gather input from Portlanders regarding experiences with and perceptions of PPB's community outreach, just to ensure that there is kind of regular engagement with Portland's communities. The second and third amendment are being made in recognition of the fact that the Office of Neighborhood Involvement is now the Office of Community and Civic Life. And so the amended language would read, under the paragraph referenced in the First Amendment, general consultation with the Office of Community and Civic Life. And then on the last page of the plan, the final paragraph, essentially doing the same.
So I would move these amendments.
Second?
We have a motion and at least 1 second, so we'll keep these on the table and open for public discussion.
Great. This concludes our presentation. I'd like to thank you all for your time and listening to us and for your support, particularly your council staff. I'd also like to express my gratitude to the AMAC for their continued collaboration and advocacy over the course of the last 2 years, because I've been here for a while. The PSEP plan would not be what it is kind of without their work, so thank you very much to them. And with that said, I'd like to invite Dr. Leroy Haynes from the AMAC to
Can I ask
offer
a
testimony.
question first?
Oh, yes,
Commissioner
please.
Saltzman.
So what safeguards are built in or are being built in to prevent this committee from becoming dysfunctional?
So I'll kind of work with Mandy in kind of explaining this, but one of the key factors is having a retreat and substantial training. The COAB did not have the opportunity for that level, the level of training that we are planning, and certainly did not have a retreat prior to being seated. And so there wasn't an opportunity at that point for kind of interpersonal relationship building. And so that in itself kind of functions to protect the group. And then beyond that, just the structure of meetings, and we're working with the facilitators to kind of plan something that is functional. We'd like for the PSEP to have an opportunity, when necessary, to conduct their work without concern for public disruption. And to the extent there are disruptions, they would have the opportunity to hold a closed door meeting. And that was language in the PSEP plan amendments that we worked with the AMAC to craft.
And what kind of time expectations are there on members?
I think we said 8 hours a month.
That was the approximate time.
8 hours a month, and then each meeting would be 3 hours in length.
So 8 hours on top of 3 hours? Or-
No.
Oh,
It would be included.
Okay.
Yeah. And then on top of that, subcommittee meetings as they're formed, and then just reading literature.
Okay. That's bordering on the high side of time commitments, in my mind, in terms of truly trying to get broad broad sector participants.
We, during the application process, we said at the outset what the kind of minimum time commitment would be. And there was, I think, broad understanding that it could be more, but that would likely be determined by PSEP members and also the facilitators and working with PSEP members as the work plan is fleshed out.
Okay.
I think one of the problems before was that we guessed wrong and we didn't we didn't say up front, can you commit to this? Some of the other things I was pleased when I met with this group yesterday to hear is that we're going to be providing much more support, both individual, personal, one-on-one, how are things going type support, but also childcare, travel expenses, dinner and such like that. So really giving the volunteers the support that they need to dedicate that amount of time.
I'll just add one more. They tend to be modest, but these 3 facilitators are outstanding. And they will readily agree. I put them through the ringer. When I first met with them, I wanted a good, hard shakedown to make sure they understood that this is not just like any community meeting. This is one where there's a lot of history. For many people, there's a lot of emotion. For others, they are members of vulnerable communities. And so the idea that they propose to actually work together on this, and they come with different strengths, I thought was a really compelling opportunity. And it is fundamentally different in the ways they're thinking, and I should probably let them talk about it, but I was really excited to hear them say they didn't want to just do the old community meeting thing exclusively. They wanted to find ways that people could feel comfortable participating. And for some people, maybe it's just picking up a phone and talking into a voicemail and not having to be there in person, or maybe it's via video or Skype, or maybe it's through some other means. And I just like the fact that these facilitators were very open and creative and innovative in terms of trying to find different ways to engage people. At the end of the day, though, I really think it's going to come down to good facilitation. The training is super important, clarifying the expectations right up front, that's really important. These facilitators know they're going to earn every dime that their contracts prescribe.
Yes.
And I'm appreciative of that.
Well, thank you all very much, and I'll use this as the time to invite Dr. Leroy Haynes to the dais.
Very good.
Thank you, Dr. Haynes. It's good to see you.
It's good to see you. To our distinguished Mayor Ted Wheeler, and to our illustrious members of the Portland City Council, I am the Dr. Leroy Haynes, chairperson of the Abana Ministerial Alliance Coalition for Justice and Police Reform. AMAC, as is often referred to, has been engaged in the leadership effort on the community perspective of police reform since the Kendra James case in 2003. We have led the effort to bring the Department of Justice in the present lawsuit on the settlement agreement that the city of Portland is presently under. Now in this transitional period of amending the original court settlement by replacing COAB with the Portland Committee for Engaging Policing, PSEP, AMAC and citizens of Portland, I want to correct one aspect of the historical, as both a theologian and historian, that during the appeal level, we were not a participant in the creation of the PSEP, but we were called in the latter stage. I think historical reference is critically important. Then we were allowed to give input to the PSEP proposal that had been drafted. It was in this council chamber that many of the proposed changes were actually made during that particular time of the council hearing. Item 952 represents many of those changes, and we are thankful for the council for hearing the voices of not only AMAC, but the many voices of the citizens in the community. Yet we still have some concerns on process that we have shared with the city. Number one, that in the procedure and the process of handling meetings, we are concerned that the public be given voice opportunity, not just in terms of very electronic devices, but actually face-to-face meeting and open sections and prior to the decision-making of PSEP board. Secondly, that PSEP establish internal procedures and protocols for carrying out the work of reviewing the settlement agreement with intentionality. Third, that PSEP, which I am glad to hear, will provide other opportunities to hear the voices of citizens throughout the community on police reform. Finally, we believe it is the responsibility of COCO to provide an opportunity for the public to review its work prior to the presentation to Judge Michael on its update on the settlement agreement. AMAC believe as PSEP go about the process of building relationship with the diverse communities, that these additions will help build trust in our much-needed community between the Portland Police Bureau and the citizens of Portland. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate your being here today.
Okay.
Nicole, does that complete your, all right, very good. How many folks do we have signed up, Carla?
We have 3 more on the list.
Very good.
Philip J. Wolf, Dan Handelman, and Charles Bridge Crane.
Oh, sorry.
Hi, Mayor Wheeler and council members. I'm Dan Handelman with Portland Cop Watch. I want to make clear that even though I'm a member of the AMA Coalition Steering Committee, I'm speaking on behalf of Portland Cop Watch today. We attended the community forum last Wednesday where Ms. Grant brought the concept of these changes forward, but there were no physical copies for anybody to look at. And I pointed out at the time that then nobody in the community could see those changes until Friday afternoon before a 3-day weekend. There were a lot of people here last August when we were contemplating these changes, this committee in the first place, and there's not as many people here today because this happened over Labor Day weekend, and a lot of people didn't even know this is happening. And so, you know, and this is a committee on community engaged policing, but a lot of the discussions about what's going into this change plan now didn't involve a full engagement of the community. So we generally are not opposed to expanding the committee to 13 members. Many people, including us, talked about how you can't have a real diverse representation of the community with only 9 people, and got the council to expand that to 11. I'm glad to see it now expanding to 13. That you clarify the length of the terms in these amendments is something else we talked about last year. We raised concerns at this meeting last week about the accommodation for people who don't want to necessarily attend the community academy or go on a ride-along. It was presented as something that was being done for ADA purposes, an accommodation in a legal sense. But there's a member of the COAB who refused to fire a weapon, a gun, during the community academy, and then was treated differently by other members of the group and the police after they did that. And I think that it should be clear that if you don't want to participate in certain parts of that training, that you shouldn't be forced to if it's a moral thing and not an ADA issue. I'm glad to hear about the reinstitution of the quarterly town halls. That was great, something that we were going to mention as a concern, although they're not being called town halls. And it's very good that, as Dr. Haynes said, that there will be public input before any vote. There was mentioned something here and last Wednesday about electronic participation, if somebody can clarify that, because it really is important for us to be in the room, watching the deliberations, and then having input just before the vote happens. I want to make sure that that's being done in a community-engaged way. There is it's also good that the subcommittees are going to be open to the public. I think that's very important as well. And in general, we express concerns constantly when these kinds of groups go on retreats, that somebody has to make absolutely sure they're not actually discussing any business that should be being discussed in a public forum. And any training materials and anything that's going to be coming up at the retreat should also be made public so that everybody knows what's happening at those.
Did you have a couple more there, Dan?
What's that?
Did you have more? You
I
wanted
did
to
have one more thing,
Sure,
which is
go
that we were told also last Wednesday that there are going to be 3 alternates. And you said, Mr. Mayor, I think just now that you have to choose among 17 adults and a couple of youth. All 5 alternate members of the COAB got burned through within the first year, and then that's why they start running out of people to reseat, to fill those empty seats. So I would think about having a larger pool of alternates, and maybe that way you can actually keep all the people who have made it to this stage engaged.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate that. Thank you. Any questions for Phil? Great. Thank you, Philip.
Good afternoon. For the record, Charles Bridgecrane Johnson. It's an honor to testify here after Philip and have at least one COAB survivor come here. I think that on that note, it was good to hear that there's a plan to better support the community members who will be PSEP members. I know that under the COAB structure, there was maybe not even any expense reimbursement for COAB members, while the COAB COCO person elevated their salary from $70,000 to over $120,000 a year. So I'm glad that we've learned a lesson from that. In preparing for this, one of the things that came up is I ended up back at a link on the city's own website, the portlandoregon.gov website /police/article/33708. How did I get there? Because I went to a search engine and I typed in Kendra James murdered by police. So the people that won't be testifying here definitely include Quanis Moose Hayes, Terrell Kareem Johnson, Aaron Campbell, Brad Lee Morgan, James Chassie, unarmed persons, one accused of having a knife or a fake gun, who are dead because we haven't perfected policing in Portland. They're not the only ones. We have had armed people in mental health crisis in parking garages, once in the Lloyd, once over by Good Sam Hospital. Those armed people, we would still like to have a resilient, trained police force that gets us down to the level of lethality that we see from police in all the civilized countries of Europe, where the number of people killed by police in Portland exceeds the death tolls of some countries. So I hope that all of you as council members will fully support, even better than you supported the COAB members, these people who are volunteering for the PSEP. I want to particularly thank Commissioner Amanda Fritz, who's appointee to the COAB, Dr. Silver. She persisted. And but that's not to fault anybody that went into the COAB. There were maybe some people think it was a little bit rushed, maybe some people weren't aware of the burdens, but definitely I think everybody who was on the city council at that time, back in the times when Mr. Novick and Mr. Hales were sitting up there, would realize that they probably could have supported those community members better. And so it will be interesting to see what November brings. After the hopeful blue wave, the PSEP can get on and hopefully find a constructive way of engaging with people. I noticed that we're going to have Daryl Walker, CEO of Cascadia. They deserve a little special credit. It used to be when you went to Cascadia's website and looked at their board of directors, it was alphabetized, so Officer Burley from the Portland Police Department, who was on the board at that time, came up, and that's not really a great way for people with mental health issues and police dealings to face things. So the proof will be in the pudding in November. I'll be looking further into the better cost balancing as far as the administrative expense versus reimbursement for just parking and stuff that those good citizens volunteering will be facing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks all three of you. Thank you.
That's all who signed up.
Very good. Colleagues, did you want to have Nicole come back up? Did you have any questions, or can you go ahead and call the roll?
Do the amendments and then the resolution.
That's correct. I'm sorry. Thanks, Nick. So we'll do, there are three amendments.
I move them as a package.
Commissioner Fish has moved them as a package. And we have a second from Commissioner Fritz. Let's call the roll on the amendments.
Saltzman.
Aye.
Udaly.
Aye.
Fritz.
Aye.
Fish.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye. The amendments are adopted. Thank you, and thank you, Nicole, for working hard to draft those. To the main motion, please. Call the roll.
Saltzman.
Aye.
Udaly.
Aye.
Fritz.
This is phenomenal work. Nicole Grant, you deserve a lot of credit for this, and thank you for persevering also. I think everybody did the best we could with the we're not on captions? Are we good? Thank you. Everybody did the best that we could with the information we had available. What's good about this is that we have learned from what didn't go so well in the past, and I was skeptical when this was introduced, and It has really become something that I'm very hopeful can succeed. Thank you, Mayor Wheeler, for your leadership on this. Thank you to the facilitators. I think that we are going to be set up really well with this new process. Thanks to Christina Nieves on my staff, who continues to help me on police issues. Julie Ramos was my appointee to the selection committee and former work on the Citizens Review Committee. There's still a lot of other aspects of the Department of Justice settlement that we need to continue to work on, and I do believe this is a good step forward. Aye.
Fish.
Aye.
Wheeler.
I think I'll keep my thank yous brief. There are a lot of people in this room who worked very, very hard over many, many months to bring us to this point, and a lot of the same people are going to be engaged in the long term, making sure this is successful. Nick, thanks. You've done a fantastic job. I appreciate it. I want to thank everybody who has worked so diligently on the selection committee. Thank you. I want to thank our friends at AMAC. I want to thank the US DOJ. Jared, thank you for your leadership and your participation. I want to thank our legal counsel, all of my colleagues who've worked hard on this in one capacity or another. To the facilitators, you've got your work cut out for you, but you're up to it. And to the members of the community, my pledge to you is to make sure that you do have the support you need to be successful in this process. I think you all know what's at stake. There's a lot riding on the success of this, and Portland needs to be one of a handful of communities that can show the rest of the country that we can make progress, and we will. And this is an important milestone in getting us there. So I vote aye. The resolution is adopted as amended. Thank you. Next item, 953.
Amend Police Review Board Code to implement stipulated discipline provisions for Portland Police Bureau members in accordance with amendments to the settlement agreement between the United States and the City of Portland.
Colleagues, this ordinance makes changes in the Police Review Board Code to allow for stipulated discipline as authorized by the Council last August when the Council approved amendments to the DOJ settlement agreement. Stipulated discipline is, in short, an off-ramp from the regular discipline process that's currently in place. It will only apply in very narrow circumstances. As agreed upon by the Council last year, it will not apply to the use of force cases, officer-involved shootings, in-custody deaths, retaliation, or disparate treatment cases. It allows involved officers to accept full responsibility for their actions and resulting discipline without any negotiation. This is not plea bargaining, this is due process. I have here again Nicole Grant, one of my senior policy advisors, who will provide further information on this item, along with Captain Jeff Bell from the PPB. Thank you for being here. And Mark Amberg from the City Attorney's Office. Thank you for being here. Take it away, Nick.
Good afternoon again, Commissioners, and I'll just state my name for the record, Nicole Grant, Senior Policy Advisor for the Mayor. As the Mayor stated, this ordinance makes changes to the Police Review Board Code with the implementation of stipulated discipline. In August 2017, Council approved amendments to the settlement agreement, which included the provision of a stipulated discipline process that would allow PPB members, with the concurrence of multiple parties, to accept the findings of an investigation and discipline. The conceptual approval of stipulated discipline accompanied the approval of other changes to PPB's discipline process, which had suffered under the weight of its complexities. Per the settlement agreement, this option would only be made available to members following the implementation of code language adhering to certain parameters. In April of this year, Judge Simon formally approved this amendment to the settlement agreement at the Fairness Hearing and Status Conference. The ordinance before you today follows up on the plans laid out in those approved amendments to the settlement agreement. It is the result of several months of conversation and negotiation with the Portland Police Association. The DOJ has advised the city of the need to have a stipulated discipline process in order to achieve substantial compliance with the settlement agreement. With that said, I'm pleased to report that the DOJ has formally approved this process. I'm here today with Captain Jeff Bell from PPB's Professional Standards Division and Mark Amberg from the City Attorney's Office, who will delve into the specifics of the code language and the process. For the sake of clarity, I just want to note that the process we are asking you to approve is just that, a process. It does not predetermine or influence discipline for PPB members. It's just intended to improve efficiencies within the system and provide both complainants and involved officers with procedural due process. And with that, I'll pass the mic to Captain Bell.
Thank you.
And again, Mayor and Commissioners, thank you for your time today. Again, I'm Jeff Bell, Captain with the Police Bureau in the Professional Standards Division. And so I'd like to provide just a little bit of context for the implementation of this, this proposed stipulated discipline. This kind of goes along with the package of amendments and to the settlement agreement and the related code changes back in August of 2017. Some of those changes were we revamped our supervisory investigation process, which at this point now is in full swing and allows non-disciplinary complaints a rather quick resolution through the officer's direct supervisor, along with investigators now providing recommended findings. The approved stipulated discipline process, the stipulated discipline process as a concept was approved by City Council, but the city still needed to negotiate the specific terms with the Portland Police Association. So part of the reason why we're doing this is, as we do as well, but the DOJ has had concerns about the timeliness of our internal investigations. And this will allow us to improve the timeliness of certain cases. And one of the main issues and one of my chief concerns when this was first talked about, this takes place at a time after the investigation is complete and after proposed discipline and proposed findings have been made. So this is not a process that occurs early in the process. This is a process that would only occur after Bureau management and the other partners in this know all of the information they need to know about what happened. This process would occur prior to a case going to a police review board. So again, it's after findings have been made and discipline has been proposed. If an officer selects to go through this process of stipulated discipline, their case would then not go through a police review board, and it would not go to the chief and the police commissioner for further consideration on the discipline. However, they would have the final say about whether or not the proposed or the stipulated discipline process can be used for any particular case. So in summary, in order for this to happen, everybody has to actually agree, and that includes the officer, Police Bureau management, IPR, and I think IPR provides a lot of the community's voice in this process. Ms. Irene Konev, I saw in the back of the room, is an excellent community outreach person. But then, of course, the chief of police and you, Mayor, as the police commissioner, would have the final say about whether or not we could actually proceed with stipulated discipline on any of these cases. Mark Amberg's going to go into further details about what cases are exactly allowed, but I think it's important to note that once stipulated discipline is agreed to by all parties, there is no grievance or appeal of that stipulated discipline. The process ends at that point. Officers must accept those findings and the proposed discipline as presented to them. As you said, Mr. Mayor, this is not a plea bargain. This is all about if the officer agrees to what the Bureau has proposed, they may accept that. If they don't accept that, then the process continues as it normally would. I think it's also important to note that this does not affect the ability of any citizens to still appeal these cases to the Citizen Review Committee. So if they have any issues with any of the findings and they want to appeal these to the Citizen Review Committee, there's nothing in this that would interfere with their ability to do that. Again, I think it's hard for us to estimate because we don't have this system in place. My personal feeling, and folks that are familiar with the system that I've talked to anticipate this will be used very infrequently, that this is something that will probably only happen a few times a year. But in those cases where it does happen, I think it's it's beneficial in that it gives both the officers involved and the complainants more timely closure rather than dragging out the process in these cases where everyone agrees kind of, and the officer is willing to take responsibility for their actions. And again, overall, it shortens our timelines and administrative work on the part of the Professional Standards Division and the Bureau in general. Again, in these cases where everyone agrees that the findings and discipline are appropriate. So I'm going to pass it off to Mr. Amberg, who will discuss the technical details of the amendment.
Thank you, Captain Bell. Mayor, Commissioners, for the record, Mark Amberg with the City Attorney's Office. As was noted, this stipulated discipline process is actually started with negotiations with the U.S. Department of Justice over some amendments, a package of amendments, so to speak, to the settlement agreement that were approved by this council last August and then approved by Judge Simon at the fairness status hearing last April. The stipulated discipline process is an important part of is viewed as an important part of improving the police discipline process, the police accountability process, to have an off-ramp, so to speak, in cases where the officer acknowledges there's been a policy violation and agrees to accept proposed discipline. Under the proposal, which, as Ms. Grant noted, the language that's in the proposed amendments to the code were negotiated with the Portland Police Association. They've also been approved by the U.S. Department of Justice. Under the proposed code amendments, which are under the Police Bureau's, the code that governs the Police Review Board, that was the place where we needed to insert this process. There are certain types of cases that are excluded, that's been discussed, cases involving alleged use of excessive force, alleged discrimination, disparate treatment, or retaliation, reviews of officer-involved shootings and in-custody deaths, and importantly, any case in which the police chief or the mayor as the police commissioner does not agree to accept the member's proposed stipulation to findings and recommended discipline. None of those cases, regardless of, I'll talk about the discipline guide in a moment, none of these cases, regardless of where they fall on the discipline guide, would be eligible for stipulated discipline. The types of cases under the code amendment that would be eligible for stipulated discipline. First of all, any first-time offenses that fall under Category A through Category D of the Police Bureau Discipline Guide, which the Discipline Guide is also, as council is aware, came out of the U.S. Department of Justice settlement agreement, is a requirement of the settlement agreement that the Police Bureau come up with and implement and follow a discipline guide. The Police Bureau's current version of the discipline guide went into effect on March 1st, 2014, and has been in effect since that time. So the categories that are referred to in this amendment, categories A through D of the guide, are defined under the guide. I would say also, the guide actually goes up, has categories E and F. Each, as you go up in the letters, then they're more serious offenses. The lower level offenses are Category A. The higher level offenses go up all the way to Category F. The stipulated discipline would not apply, with one exception that I'll note, to any case that would fall under a Category E or a Category F on the discipline guide. Categories E and F on the discipline guide are where the first time on the guide where there could be a potential termination of an officer's employment for whatever the misconduct was. Second time offenses that fall under Category A, the lowest level of discipline on the guide, would be eligible for stipulated discipline. Again, with the review of everybody involved, IPR, the member's assistant chief, professional standards, and also the police chief and the commissioner, police commissioner. The other categories of cases which would be eligible for stipulated discipline, which is, they actually fall under Category E, and these would be first-time off-duty driving while under the influence offenses that fall under Category E. To be eligible for stipulated discipline for an off-duty driving under the influence offense, it has to be a non-aggravated offense. There can be no other driving-related violations or charges, such as a reckless driving charge or something of that nature. And the member must comply with all court-ordered, they must enter into a diversion, and here in Oregon or in the state of Washington, it's referred to as a delayed prosecution. They're essentially the same thing. The member would have to enter into that program and would have to comply with all court-ordered conditions of a diversion or delayed prosecution to be eligible for stipulated discipline. If not all of those conditions are met, they would not be eligible for stipulated discipline for an off-duty driving under the influence offense. So those are the categories of cases that would be eligible for stipulated discipline. A couple of notes. First of all, when there's a number of cases involve multiple claim violations of policy, in those cases where there's multiple sustained violations, the violation would be set at the highest category on the discipline guide for purposes of determining whether the case would be eligible for stipulated discipline. So if you have multiple violations and one of those violations fell into an E or an F, even though other offenses might fall under in lower categories, would not be eligible for stipulated discipline. There's two other parts of the proposed code amendment that I want to note. One is that with the exception of excluded categories, those in negotiations with the Portland Police Association, if there's some other category or type of case, for example, the one that we have here in front of us is the off-duty non-aggravated driving under the influence charge, but if there's some other category or type of case that the police association, the police commissioner, the police chief believes should be eligible for stipulated discipline, there's the opportunity to agree on that category of cases being eligible for stipulated discipline. Finally, one other amendment that's in the code that really, it doesn't have anything to do with stipulated discipline, but since this code section is coming before council, this is in certain sections of the code as it currently reads. Where the code talks about the types of cases that have to be reviewed by the Police Review Board. One of the categories of cases that's defined in the code at this point in time are less lethal incidents where the recommended finding is out of policy. Under Police Bureau practice and under Police Bureau directives, all use of force incidents, whether they're less lethal uses of force or a deadly use of force or some other type of use of force, all use of force incidents go before the Police Review Board for review. And so we've offered a cleanup amendment to the code to clarify that all use of force cases, regardless of the type, not just less lethal use of force incidents, will go before the Police Review Board for review. And that's it, unless there are any questions from council.
Commissioner Fritz.
So thank you. This is the third time I've had this explained to me, and I think I may be starting to get it. So let's give it this. Let me see if I'm understanding, because the mayor said at the beginning, this is not a plea bargain. And one of the concerns I have about this is looking at the discipline guide and thinking that the discipline imposed doesn't seem to be severe enough in some instances, in my opinion. But what you're saying is that this process, the discipline would be the same whether they go through the police review board or not. But in this stipulated agreement process, they say, yes, I did it, and I'll accept the discipline on the guide. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. If the proposed discipline that would be initiated by the member's RU or responsibility or reporting unit manager, if the member did not accept that, that is the proposed discipline that would go through the review board process. There's no guarantee what the review board is going to do with that, or ultimately the chief and the mayor, but that would be the proposed discipline that would go to the review board.
Okay, so significant deviation from policy resulting in a vehicle crash, first offense, letter of reprimand. And the officer would say, yes, give me my letter of reprimand, I'm on my way. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So then I can support this process. My question and concern is I don't support this discipline guide. And this is the first time that it's come to the council, including when we were promised a discipline guide in part of the DOJ settlement and when we paid a 9% raise, a $9 million raise to the police bureau, to the police officers. So, in my opinion, a vehicle crash is an assault with a deadly weapon. And so I don't think you should get a letter of reprimand for a significant deviation of policy that causes a crash. And so what is the process for changing this discipline guide?
Sure. Captain Bell can speak to it as well, but currently there is a Police Bureau directive in place that addresses the discipline guide and allows for a process for change. And the process for that change is, it can be changed by the police chief with concurrence with the police commissioner really at any time, but there's a review process where the Professional Standards Division of the Police Bureau, in conjunction with the City Attorney's Office, is supposed to review the guide and make recommendations to the police chief on proposed changes. That's the official process that's in place under the directive and is designed to ensure there's some kind of at least annual review of the guide and looking at potential changes. But ultimately, it's the police chief, again, in concurrence with the police commissioner, who would make changes to the guide. And there's no limit on the input.
Does that have to be bargained with the Portland Police Association?
That is a good question. There's some questions about the extent to which it would have to be bargained with the police union. We've taken the position in the past that it's a guide, it's a management tool that does not have to be bargained. I think that the police association would certainly take the position that because it impacts discipline and job security at a minimum, that it does have to be bargained. So we would enter into bargaining with the union over significant changes to the guide, but that is a bit of an open question.
Well, Mayor, are you willing to commit to having a conversation with me into reviewing this?
I'm willing to have the conversation, but obviously I'd like to have more insight into this, but yes, certainly.
Yeah, because just throughout this guide, I appreciate that we did pay for getting terminations to stick for Category F violations, but there are several, throughout the A through D categories, the discipline seems to be more of a slap on the wrist than a significant deterrent to doing the behavior again. But I'm now understanding that's not, we're just saying that in some instances, the officer can agree, yes, I'll take the discipline, and then we use a different process to change what the discipline is.
Yes.
Well, Mayor, just let me be clear. If we're going to get into the question of discipline, I think it has to come up through some regular order. It has to be part of a process where recommendations come to council. This is not a conversation between you and Commissioner Fritz, with all due respect.
Oh, it's a starting conversation.
It's a council discussion, and it may very well involve collective bargaining. I mean, we don't have such a great track record on those issues. And so, but let's be clear, the there are benefits to us of having a stipulated discipline provision independent of whether you think the discipline tree is correct. That's the issue before us today. And I think we should keep a clear demarcation between the two. This is something that has a benefit to us, has been approved by the Department of Justice. I think we can take this action and still go through a thoughtful process of determining whether or not the proposed discipline for any particular action is adequate. And I also want to caution us in a hearing commenting on whether any particular matter is an adequate discipline. This is a carefully calibrated system that requires a certain level of fairness and due process on both sides, and I don't think you should be driven by anecdotes.
Got a couple of questions.
Commissioner Saltzman.
Are cases that are subject to stipulated discipline, are those public records?
Well, I mean, yes, they are public record, but there is an exemption under the public records law for cases that result in discipline. So whether they would be released publicly is, it really is determined on a case-by-case basis. Normally.
Well, I guess what if the media requests the records?
Right. No,
Do we make that available or not?
normally, we do not make those available. In the normal case, in a discipline case, we usually claim the exemption and claim those records as exempt from public disclosure. And of course, depends on a number of factors, the egregiousness of the conduct involved, the rank or position of the employee involved, and if there may have been some otherwise public notoriety about the particular event involved. But those are all factors we look at. But generally, I would say.
That would be applied whether it goes through stipulated discipline or it goes through the full police review board? I mean, it's the same policy about releasing it to the public?
Yes, whether it was stipulated discipline or discipline through the regular process wouldn't change that at all. There wouldn't be any change to that.
And then I guess I was wondering about issues around an officer involved in domestic violence, stalking, violating restraining order, having sex with a subordinate. Are those eligible for stipulated discipline?
They almost certainly would not be eligible because they would fall under a category E or a category F on the discipline guide. So I suppose there might, I can't think of a circumstance, maybe Captain Bell could give his thoughts, but I can't think of a circumstance where it would be eligible for
So none of those actions would be subject to a stipulated discipline avenue?
Correct, and I think the other factor.
But then you said a few minutes ago that what's subject to stipulated discipline, beyond what's clearly prohibited in this ordinance, is could be up to the commissioner in charge, the chief, a couple other people. So is it possible that handful of other people could decide a domestic violence issue or sex with a subordinate or whatever could be subject to this stipulated discipline when it's clearly not anticipated right now, but could be by those players? I can't remember all the players you listed. But.
That would, I suppose it is possible, but that would have to be their commanding officer, an assistant chief, myself, Director Sevier from IPR, and then if all those people agreed, it would still go before the chief and the mayor as the police commissioner for a final approval. So
all those people would have to agree?
All those people would have to agree, and I would.
If one of them objected, that would.
That would kick it back to a normal process where it would go through a police review board.
Right. The default is always going through the normal process, of course, and so in any case along the way, any of those individuals can say, no, this case, I'm not comfortable with this case going through a stipulated discipline process. I think it needs to go through the full-blown review process. Mm-hmm. Any one of those individuals can make that happen.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor?
Commissioner Daly.
I am also interested in the conversation about the discipline guide, so please add my name to the list. And I do have an amendment to propose. So in the stipulated findings and discipline section under subsection 2E, it states that categories or types of cases eligible for stipulated discipline may be expanded upon by agreement of the commissioner in charge, the chief, and the bargaining unit representatives. I feel since discipline procedures for the police bureau are a matter of great public interest, that I would strongly prefer them to be subject to council, full council approval. And this is meant to increase the transparency of these processes. So here is the amendment number 1 language. In section J, subsection 2E, to delete the commissioner in charge and add "and city council." This is the code as amended. E, with the exception of the categories of cases listed in subsection 3.20.140J.1, the categories or types of cases from the Police Bureau Discipline Guide eligible for stipulated discipline may be expanded upon mutual agreement of the chief, bargaining unit representatives, and city council.
Second.
We have a motion and a second.
Thank you.
And Commissioners, I would also like to offer an amendment to the proposed code language. So it may seem strange for me to offer an amendment at this stage, given kind of the negotiations with the Portland Police Association. Mark Amberg flagged an inconsistency or potential inconsistency between the PRB code and the language for this process. And when this issue was raised with the union, there was a refusal to return to their board with any changes, and so we're bringing it before you for approval. The PRB code requires that certain incidents involving use of force, actually, I'm sorry, Carla, could you distribute the amendments? I apologize.
Yeah. And then I'll be happy to move them for you.
So the PRB code requires that certain incidents involving use of force must go before the PRB. They include all officer-involved shootings, physical injury caused by an officer that requires hospitalization, all in-custody deaths, and any use of force where the recommended finding is out of policy. Within the current version of the code, officer-involved shootings and in-custody deaths fall under a general umbrella of uses of force. Both the settlement agreement amendments and these code changes list among the excluded categories alleged uses of excessive force, officer-involved shootings, and in-custody deaths. So in this most recent language that we're adding, officer-involved shootings and in-custody deaths are distinguished from cases involving alleged use of excessive force. So what that potentially means then is that outside of officer-involved shootings and in-custody deaths, which are already explicitly excluded by the new code language, it's arguable whether physical injury caused by an officer that requires hospitalization and any use of force where the recommended finding is out of policy would also be excluded. So the amendment I'm offering is a simple clarification of 3.20.140J1, that those two additional categories I mentioned, both involving uses of force, are explicitly ineligible for stipulated discipline, preserving the original mandate that they go before the PRB and are subject to the regular discipline process. And you all have copies of that amendment in front of you.
So I move it.
Second.
We have a motion and a second.
Thank you. Do you have any other questions?
So Commissioner Daly, I apologize. I'm just tracking as you were reading your amendment, which I see as part of my package, but I haven't taken a look. So would you walk us through your amendment one more time, just so I get it?
Oh, sure. It's fairly simple. It's just amending the language in section J, the same section Nicole just referred to say that rather than stipulated discipline being expanded upon by the commissioner in charge, the chief, and the bargaining unit representatives, that it will be the full council, will be heard by council.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Very good. And does that conclude your presentation?
That concludes our presentation.
Fabulous. Public testimony, Carla.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Yes, we have two people signed up.
Excellent. Come on up.
Dan Handelman and Charles Bridge-Crane.
Hello again. City council members and mayor. I'm Dan Handelman from Portland Cop Watch, as I was a few minutes ago. These amendments have, in terms of the timing, the same problem that I expressed around the last item, which is they were only noted and posted on Friday afternoon. So a lot of people in the community who are very interested in this issue probably aren't even aware that this is being discussed today. The fact that the Police Review Board code is being opened up again and a cleanup is being done in one area where a lot of other issues that the community has been asking for around this process for years are not on the table is very frustrating. We have very rarely get a chance to change this code, and some of these changes are being made because of the DOJ agreement, but there's another one being made not because of that. And among other things, we have long asked for the person who's harmed by the police to be allowed to speak to the Police Review Board, and that's not being contemplated today. One of the things, and Commissioner Saltzman came very close to getting at this, one of the things we raised when these changes were being proposed to the settlement agreement is that the cases that are resolved through stipulation should be reported on in the twice-a-year public reports. That's not listed in here. It's not clear if they're going to be reported on, and I would like council to make a firm decision about that before you leave today. Those are the reports that we made Mad Libs out of because they're so redacted you can't even tell the gender of the people involved, so it's not going to expose the name of the officer or anything. It's just that the people need to know what kind of violations are going on that officers are being disciplined for, and if they're excluded from that report, then we're losing out on that information. On that note, this discipline guide was actually posted also. It was actually posted on Saturday of Labor Day weekend along with 16 other directives for review, and we only have 15 days, so that didn't even give us 1 day per directive to look at them. But that directive is up for comment, public comment right now, and I don't know why the Bureau released so many directives at the same time. We also have asked that the media and or the public be allowed into Police Review Board meetings, which I think would be useful. But another thing that is actually in this settlement agreement, and we've repeatedly asked that it be added to the code, but I believe that it's in the directive, but it's not in the ordinance still, is that if the Police Review Board sends a case back for more investigation, that whoever investigated IPR or IA has to do more investigation and return to them within 10 days. That's part of the settlement agreement, but is not listed in the code. And I don't know why that's not being fixed at the same time since we're fixing this around the settlement agreement issues. The review board, by the way, Commissioner Fritz, I believe, could recommend a higher discipline because a lot of these categories have this, 1, 2, or 3 kinds of discipline that are possible. So it's possible the person will stipulate to something lower than what the Police Review Board would recommend, which would still be in line with that guide. And also, just one more thing, that one of the advantages of the Police Review Board hearings is that they, including the civilian member, which is a very important part of the process, get to make recommendations around policies that come up to these cases, and that's going to all be lost by the stipulation.
So, Dan, what are these twice-a-year reports? I guess I don't know what those are.
The Police Review Board reports come out, well, actually, I'm glad you asked me that question because they're supposed to come out twice a year. And the last one that came out was in November of 2017. They usually come out in January and July each year. And it has a summary of the Police Review Board hearing laying out how many votes there were, not who voted which way, what the outcome was, what the recommended discipline was, and then there's usually a cover sheet, but I think they've changed that now to say whether the final discipline differed from what was recommended by the board. This is a very important report because those hearings are closed to the public and even the person who's there. So that's those reports. And okay. the one that was supposed to come out in January, I was told by the police PIO was handed to the city attorney's office in early July, and it still hasn't been released, and I'm not sure why.
And are the officers' names?
No, that's what I said. It's so we made a joke out of it that it's so redacted you don't even know the gender of anybody involved. So I think it's goes overboard in protecting everybody involved. Yeah, there's a lot of information that's redacted. Even what precinct it was in, for instance, sometimes gets redacted.
And so you're saying the stipulated discipline should also be contained in that summary?
I think it'd be very helpful because that way we'd know these are the offenses that have happened and these are the disciplines that are being doled out for those So you get a bigger picture of what's going on in terms of, the transparency we keep talking about.
I think that's a really good point, and I think you're correct that it's specifically not listed as something that needs to be in the report, so I'll make an amendment.
Make that amendment.
I'll make an amendment after we've heard the rest of the testimony.
Good afternoon. Thank you again, Councilors. Charles Bridge Crane Johnson for the record. And it's very encouraging to see your attentiveness there. And I think that's important in the context of we've just talked about the PSEP. Will the PSEP have full access to unredacted information from the PRB? Probably not. If we want the PSEP to do a good job, we need to find a way to give the PSEP to have, ideally, we need to improve public access to the PRB, but at least for the PSEP. As Commissioner Saltzman's excellent question noted, where is the self-analysis data from the police? How can we talk about the quality of policing in various neighborhoods if they redact the precinct? We need to know by zip code or more specific information where problem policing is happening. So I think maybe you've overloaded your plate. You've got some amendments from the mayor's staff, from Commissioner Udaly. I think you can probably move and pass those amendments, but I hope that you'll very strongly consider bringing this back again for a better look to get longer period of public input to nail down ways so that it's not just about attacking the police. It's about making sure the police and yourselves and the PSEP have data to find out where mistakes, problems, possibly racist incidents are happening and being able to take corrective action. So I thank you all for your attentiveness and the robust discussion you've had around here. I hope you won't just stop with approving today's amendments, but you'll soon on the agenda, and maybe possibly this should be on the PSEP agenda when they start meeting in November. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Let's get our staff back to...
Commissioner Fritz. Commissioner Saltzman, did you have a question?
No, I wanted to move an amendment to include the stipulated discipline items to be included in the Police Review Board's semi-annual or twice
So
a year report.
I actually have the language, but I'd like to ask the staff about it.
Okay.
And I believe this goes in section I, and it would be a new number 3, which is, section I starts on page 7 and goes to, this would be on page 8 of Exhibit A. And I'm suggesting that it would add a number 3 to say any stipulated agreements where a final decision has been reached. I'm just wanting to get your opinion as to that.
I have no objections. I fully support that.
Could you read that again? What was it?
It would add to section I, number 3 on page 8 of Exhibit A, number 3, any stipulated agreements where a final decision has been reached. Or if Mr. Amberg has better language, I would be happy to take it.
I wouldn't, I wouldn't say that for sure, but yeah, I think that's, certainly seems like a fair amendment. But
conveys what we're trying to get to.
It didn't occur to me until Commissioner Saltzman brought it up, and I actually agree with Mr. Handelman. I think it's totally appropriate to include those in the biannual PRB reports.
Mm-hmm. So I move that amendment.
Second.
Very good. We have a motion and a second. So we have 3 amendments on the table. We have Commissioner Udaly's amendment. We have my amendment that Nicole has worked with us to put on the table, and now we have a 3rd amendment, Commissioner Fritz's amendment. Why don't we take the amendments up in order unless anybody has any further questions? We'll start with Commissioner Udaly's amendment.
think
Any
the-
further discussion? I'm sorry?
The order was actually Wheeler amendment?
No,
Commissioner
it
Wheeler? You have
was,
it, okay. It says
Udaly's
Wheeler
was
1.
first.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. Commissioner Udaly's. Carla, please call the roll unless anybody has any further questions. Very good.
Saltzman?
Aye.
Udaly?
Aye.
Fritz?
Thank you. Really good catch, Commissioner Udaly. Aye.
Fish?
Aye.
Wheeler?
Aye. The amendment's adopted. Next up is Wheeler Amendment 1. Please call the roll.
Saltzman?
Aye.
Udaly?
Aye.
Fritz?
Absolutely the wonkiest amendment of the afternoon. Thank you very much for catching it. Aye.
Fish?
Aye.
Wheeler?
And this is why lawyers are important. I vote aye. The amendment's adopted.
Glad you noted that
Thank
for
you,
the
Mark.
record. Thank you.
And the third and final amendment is the one that Commissioner Fritz just outlined with Commissioner Saltzman.
Saltzman?
Aye.
Udaly?
Well, I have to mark this occasion because I don't know how often, if ever, a member of the Portland Police Bureau has expressed agreement with Mr. Dan Handelman. And I think it's a notable occasion and one that I think we're probably all going to agree on. So I vote aye.
Fritz.
That's a really important comment because we are making progress, I believe. And thank you, Mr. Handelman, for your ongoing diligence. We can always count on you, and you often come with a great suggestion, so thank you. Aye.
Fish.
Maybe we should get like a CD and burn it and frame it for Dan. So, aye.
Wheeler.
This is common sense. I appreciate it. I vote aye. The amendment is adopted. Now to the main motion. Any further questions or comments, colleagues?
Stoltzman.
Aye.
Udaly.
So we know that disciplinary actions lose meaning if they occur too long after the violation of a policy. As the DOJ pointed out, a drawn-out accountability process reasonably makes it harder for the public to trust that there are consequences for officers who act in violation of policies. Today's ordinance reflects a common-sense approach, and I appreciate the number of checks on power that are included here. I'm also encouraged by the Independent Police Review's approval of this policy. I vote aye.
Fritz.
I concur with some of the testimony that we heard, particularly Mr. Handelman's, that it's unfortunate that we're not fixing some of the other things which are outstanding. I hope we will continue. It seems like we're building some momentum here. Thank you, Nicole Grant, for going the extra mile to help me understand this, and also Mark Amberg for your briefing yesterday. It's an important step forward, and it's finally brought to the light of day the discipline guide, which obviously I think needs some work. Aye.
Fish.
Aye.
Wheeler.
In my role as police commissioner, obviously a number of police discipline cases cross my desk on a regular basis. In my review of each case, it's impossible not to notice how far back some of the cases extend between the date of the incident or the beginning of the investigation to the final discipline letter that is sent to the involved officer. Some of those timeframes are unacceptably long, ranging from a year to 2 years for cases in which the officer accepted responsibility long before. This doesn't just mean that officers are left wondering when their cases are going to be resolved. It also means that community members who've brought complaints forward don't see a resolution for substantially long periods of time. Again, that is not due process. The result of this is lower morale and a vote of no confidence from the public in a Byzantine system that doesn't seem to do much to right the wrongs that they experience. One of the key areas of focus for my administration has obviously been strengthening our police bureau and making the bureau more accountable to the public that it serves. Due process and accountability demand that officers and community members are given closure with their cases in a timely manner. We need to continue supporting a system that treats all involved parties fairly and respects them throughout their engagement with the city. Accountability means clarity for the public and bureau members at all stages of the discipline process. As a city, we can and should provide better service for our constituents. We should provide more clarity for our officers. We all agree we need to do better. We will do better. And I believe this process is an important waypoint in getting us there. So I vote aye. The resolution is adopted as amended. Thank you, everybody. Nicole, again, thank you. Resolution's adopted as amended, and we are
Are we going to talk about tomorrow?
adjourned. Before we ring out, did we reach a resolution on tomorrow, Mustafa, in the council session? Okay, colleagues will hear more about that. Apparently, we have a couple of absences for
Let's
tomorrow.
just tell the public that it's possible we might not be meeting tomorrow.
And that's fine, but you will still need to reconvene tomorrow to make that. I mean,
Because
you can
of the
warn
time.
that that's a
So now?
potential, but yeah.
Okay.
Well, and then Mayor, you just said that the resolution was adopted as amended, but it was an ordinance. So I just
I'm
wanted to
sorry.
clarify that for the record. Thank you.
Okay, take two. The ordinance is adopted as amended. Very good. All right, we are adjourned. Yeah, of course.